This morning is our final face-to-face chat with election candidates in Mayo ahead of the general election on Friday. 14 of the 16 candidates on your ballot sheet have come into studio to join us for these discussions. And if you have a question for our final guest, Joe Daly, who's representing People Before Profit, please get it into us straight away. Actually, I see one already that says, has Joe Daly got an email? I'm sure you have. Good morning.
Good morning, Tommy. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. Thanks for coming in. You do have an email.
I do, yes. Joe Daly, pbpmayo@gmail.com.
Okay, so that's Joe Daly,
PBP.
Sorry, People Before Profit.
Yeah, pbpmayo@gmail.com.
Great. So what makes People Before Profit different to all the other runners and riders, Joe?
Well, I suppose if I go back to my own experience as an activist on the water charges campaign, what stood out to me was People Before Profit reps and members who are the most determined fighters on that campaign. In my view, they drove that campaign, and I think they drove it very, very successfully, and we ended up winning that campaign and preventing the privatisation of water. So that was the first experience that I had with People for Profit as a party. That was what inspired me to actually join the party and get involved directly. I had been a trade union activist inside the teachers' unions since 2008. I'd seen all the cuts, and I was so angry at how the government, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, successive governments had treated students, teachers and in general workers in society, and made workers pay for the collapse of the system, you know.
So why do you believe that an awful lot of people and the electorate don't buy into People Before Profit? Because if you look at the polls, you know, they don't perform particularly well. Why is that?
Well, I think if you look back at at the height of the water charges movement, we had a very high polling, and we got a number of TDs. We had 6 TDs elected at one point from the radical left. So I think when the campaigns are high, when the fighting spirit of working people is high, when there's people-powered movement on the streets or in the workplaces, I think People for Profit does very, very well, because we relate to that spirit of fighting back. And I think that during the repeal, we also saw our polls going up to 9-10%. So I think when workers are feeling energised, feeling confident, willing to fight, we do well in the polls. When they're a little bit demoralised, as we see now in the past post-COVID era has had a demoralising effect, we see that the radical left doesn't seem to poll as well.
You contested the 2020 election, 721 votes. Then the local elections, 246. Were you disappointed in the local elections with that?
We felt that I was disappointed, obviously. We had done a lot better in the previous local elections. We had got over 3% of the vote in the previous local elections. So we were down just below 2% in this local election. Now, that was symptomatic of the lack, during COVID, the lack of ability to build these people-powered campaigns, to get stuck in on the issues, housing, health, cost of living, etc. We were literally tied to our homes. So that had a very significant effect. The far right had their moment, and we had politics shifted to the right, and I think that's really the result that you're seeing. But what we also saw during the local elections is that who benefited from the shift to the right, it was Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. They got back into power in the local elections. The so-called independents didn't do what they weren't independent. Right around councils across the country, they are supporting Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael councils, and so we're saying we are offering a genuine left alternative. We're the only party that we stand out against supporting Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. We will never prop them up. We would like to call on Sinn Féin to do the same. And I think that if Sinn Féin, Mary Lou MacDonald came out in the morning and said no coalition with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, no propping up those two parties, we want a genuine left government, that would electrify this campaign. And I think that's what the majority of workers would like to see.
Bit late in the day now for that, isn't it?
But it would still have, I think, an electrifying effect.
Yeah. Richard Boyd Barrett is the leader of your political party.
And he's the spokesperson.
Spokesperson.
The national spokesperson.
Who's your leader then?
We don't have an elected leader. We have a collective leadership. Democratically elected collective leadership.
Okay. The fact that, you are anti-Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the establishment, as we've had in this country for over 100 years. So why do you think then that election after election we re-elect them? Is it because we're afraid of change, or is it that maybe they aren't doing as bad a job as you say they're doing?
Well, I think, first of all, I think they're very good at we say, for example, in this election, they're very good at buying elections in terms of the budget giveaway before the poll. So they've done that with their once-off supports in terms of, we say, childcare, energy credits, and things like that. Okay, they've given away the budget. It's a giveaway budget because they've had the means to do so. But there's also a historical legacy of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. There are people who are connected in with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and that takes time to change. People are conservative naturally, I think, because they don't like change. They don't want to change. You have to really convince them to change. And that's why we do. We spend so much time and effort trying to convince people, trying to explain to people why we think Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are bad for workers, why we think they are the parties of big corporations, vultures, why they have created Ireland as a tax haven, why they don't invest in public services, why they privatise our public services. And over time, I think we are winning there. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are now at historically low levels. Together, they can barely muster 42%. In the past, Fianna Fáil might have got 75% on their own. I remember in the 70s, they got 77%, I think.
Yeah.
So they are down, and they are together now, and we now have a left-right divide in Irish politics. That's a sign that things are changing.
The naming of your party, People Before Profit, suggests that you're anti-profit.
Well, what we're saying is that we have great sympathy for small businesses because they are caught between having to compete with big corporate entities and also trying to minimise demands of working class people. So we have sympathy for them, and they'll get a better deal from socialists in the Dáil than Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael ever gave them. But we have to look at the evidence, and what the evidence shows is that the history of decisions in this country are completely and utterly weighted towards the needs of profit.
Give examples.
Okay. For example, they gave away our natural resources. Since the 50s, they've been giving away our natural resources. They gave away the Tara mines in Meath, which were the largest zinc and copper mines in Europe. They gave it away for a pittance behind closed doors to Canadian mining companies. They didn't even bother to build downstream industries. They gave away the Corb gas field. And now they made 300 million last year, which was going tax-free. Tax-free on their profits. If you put a 20% tax on that, you make 60 million a year. Over 5 years, that's 300 million in tax revenue that we're not getting. And we're saying, we see this right through the privatisation of the ESB. Privatisation of the ESB was one of the worst things to happen for workers. We had the lowest electricity prices in Europe. We had a very, very highly efficient...
Sorry, you mean the highest electricity prices?
Sorry, we had the lowest in...
Had.
Right. Sorry, back prior to privatisation.
Right.
Prices have now, since privatisation, have gone up 267%. So we've almost tripled prices in energy. We now have the highest prices in electricity in the EU, according to Eurostat. And we're not even taxing these big multinational corporations. Effectively, British corporations have now come into Ireland, are now effectively providing electricity at extremely high prices to Irish consumers and Irish small businesses.
And are they providing jobs?
Actually, the number of jobs has actually decreased to 1/3 of what it was. In other words, when they introduce technology, that boosts productivity, so they cut workers' jobs. And so effectively, if you look at the health service, privatisation of health services, private hospitals on public land, huge tax breaks, right across, the vulture funds, tax-free on their profits, it doesn't matter where you look, they put the priorities of profit before people.
Okay, you are a relatively young man. You're a school teacher by profession. You teach physics and chemistry in St. Giles Secondary School in Castlebar. Have you your own house in Castlebar? Are you on the property ladder yourself?
I don't have a house. No, I don't have. I sold my house after the crash. Beg your pardon. And I don't have a house now. No.
Yeah, but the people of your age, your friends, your associates, are they getting on the priority? Is housing the big one?
Housing, the four key issues that I see are housing, cost of living, we have health, well, 5 key issues: health, the Palestine issue, and climate change. They're the big issues, and they are all interlinked.
Ironically, you're not saying immigration or migration or IPAS
migration. Immigrants come to this country if they are given the right to work. They are allowed to live where they choose. Like Irish people, millions of Irish people who have emigrated in the past. 350,000 Irish people emigrated since 2008 and 2015. They went and they had the right to work. They contributed to the societies where they travelled. Members of the far right whipped up anti-Irish sentiment against Irish workers abroad, said Irish workers are taking your jobs, taking your houses. All of this stuff is a scapegoating tactic. And I believe that the far right are busy fools for the establishment. They are doing the dirty work of the establishment by shifting the narrative away from housing and health and all the crises that they have created, which existed long before the immigration crisis, shifting the blame for those policies onto immigrants. Okay. It's a scapegoating tactic.
But what is the people before profit philosophy on how to solve the housing crisis?
Okay, well, it's very simple. Our overarching principle is universal access to public services. And in terms of housing, we want a Vienna model of housing, which is basically we would create public housing that's open for all, access for all, high quality public housing built by a state construction company, where we would use the Apple billions to seed that company, 500 million in the first year, and we would rapidly build that company to build social and affordable housing available to open to all. You pay based on your ability to pay, based on your income, and ramping up the production of that on public land, transforming the mandate of the LDA, which is a quango for giving away public land, and using those public land banks to build housing directly.
And what about the people who can't afford to buy these houses?
These houses are not going to be bought. They are going to be, well, we would provide affordable housing as well,
right,
at cost price built by the state construction company, but we would provide these houses that they would be paying a differential rent based on their income. So in, for example, a city like Vienna, the 60% of people live in publicly owned housing. They pay a rent that is they have a lifelong lease. In fact, you can inherit the lease and you can transfer it to your kids if you have to, but you pay a rent based on your ability to pay. There isn't a homeless crisis in Vienna. And we could solve this crisis if we had the political will to use the billions that we have in this country going untaxed to do that.
Okay, talk to me about health.
Yeah.
What's the people before profit philosophy?
The big issue with health is that we have a two-tier system. We have a private system of health provision that is feeding parasitically off the public system. I remember, it brings me back to a quote from an interview with Brendan Howlin in the 90s. He was former Labour Minister for Health in the 90s with the Fianna Fáil government. And he said after his term in office, he said, we had to ensure that the public health system wasn't working efficiently so that we could get 30% of people onto private health insurance. Now, if you look at private health insurance in this country, it's massively subsidised publicly. The wealthier you are, the bigger the policy you can get, the more subsidy you get. So it's public money being transferred into private pockets. Charlie McCreevy, the former Fianna Fáil finance minister, introduced about 45% tax breaks on the building of private hospitals on public land. Mary Harney, the Progressive Democrats Minister for Health, allowed private developers to build private hospitals on public land. And now we have private hospitals side by side with public hospitals, and we have private consultants going in and doing their work in private hospitals and leaving the difficult cases, the chronic cases in the public hospital, which is causing a crisis in our waiting list. So we now have almost 1 million people on some form of hospital waiting list.
But Joe, the government will argue, and successive governments will argue this point, that they have tried to change that system, but that because of archaic laws and legal contracts, it's almost impossible to do it.
The government can declare a health emergency, like we had with the COVID emergency. They can bring in laws that will allow them to commandeer all private hospitals and bring them into the public system and put all consultants on a well-paid public salary, like the NHS, a universal health system that is paid for through progressive taxation. That is what we're looking for. Free at the point of service, removing all hospital charges and all private health insurance from the public system. If people want to go to a private hospital, they can do that, but let them pay themselves if they're capable of paying. We want a public system that is universally accessed. Okay. And so we're saying this was introduced by laws, introduced by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and it can be undone by laws. What
do people before profit advocate as being the minimum wage? Do you believe it's
€15 at the minimum?
15.
That's what Social Justice Ireland are saying, €15 per hour.
Where are we at the moment? We're on 13, 12.
Yeah, gone slightly up in the last budget,
right,
but it's around €13. 12.70 was the last prior to the previous budget. So we're saying you cannot live. A single mother on a minimum wage cannot survive. Why is there a minimum wage? Like, why is it allowed to happen that we have a minimum wage below the minimum level of survival and poverty. You know what I mean? It seems completely and utterly unfair. And yet we have corporations who pay a lower rate of tax than income tax workers. We have a completely unfair income tax system. So we would introduce 4 income tax bands above €100,000, and that would bring in $4 billion a year. Because Ireland has a very inequitable income tax system. We pay the higher rate of tax at a lower salary than you do in France or Germany, and then you don't have all these extra income tax.
Are you in favour of banning or getting rid of the universal social charge?
Universal social charge is an inequitable double tax on working families, and it should be removed for everyone below €100,000, and that would cost about $3.2 billion per year to do that. But we've shown in our budget how we would fully cost that, and so we're saying USC, unfair tax, just like the local property tax, an unfair double tax on the family home. We would introduce a second or a non-principal primary residence tax, and we would on all second homes. We would have a multimillionaires tax on wealth above the value of 4.7 million, which would bring in 8 billion. Now that would only affect 1% of the population. Let's take things like fuel. So we have carbon taxes ramped up by the Greens in government. And I think it was a disgraceful betrayal of the environmental movement, and it has turned an awful lot of farmers and working people against environmental change. And it's a very destructive policy, along with the data centres, along with LNG gas terminals. We are saying remove the carbon taxes on ordinary working people, double the investment in public transport, massively expand the public transport infrastructure, electrify rails, rail lines, and a Western Rail corridor right up to Donegal. But we're saying that these carbon taxes are completely unjust and unfair. And instead, look what we have. We have no carbon tax on aviation fuel in this country. Now, a relative, the same rate of tax on aviation fuel would bring in 325 million. And it would be an equitable tax, because I was looking at the figures, because I was looking at the strategic development zone policy of Fine Gael and all this, and they've been stringing the electorate of East Mayo along for the last 10, 15 years with this strategic development zone, which is effectively a tax haven strategy again, and it can never compete with Shannon Airport or Cork. We have 231,000 flights in and out of Ireland, Irish airports. 84% of those are through Dublin. I was looking at the figures for Knock. Would you believe there's 6,000 flights in and out of Knock per year, right? That is, as a percentage of the total, that's 0.026% of the total flights in and out of Knock. So we're talking about a minuscule number of flights in Knock. What we need to do with Knock is, as I said, massive investment in public transport that would connect up Knock with all the other towns and villages in the area, provide free public transport. It would cost 625 million to do that, just to provide free fares. Expand it out to all the main towns and villages across this county and across this country, which has been done in other countries around the world. Public transport is now being made free right around the world. It's an environmentally friendly policy, and the Greens have opposed it, and it's ridiculous.
Finally, if I was to ask you for 3 policies that we haven't already mentioned that are in your manifesto for People Before Profit that could make a difference to the people of Mayo, what would they be? We've talked health, we've talked tax,
housing.
Is there anything else? Education, for example?
Education, yeah. I mean, look, public childcare system. That's what we need. I mean, look, knocking on the doors when you talk to, especially women at the doors, because they are shouldered with the burden of childcare, and they are the vast majority of workers in the childcare sector. We are saying public childcare system that is based on the national primary school system, that brings workers in from the private sector, gives private operators the option to come into that system and run it, that pays workers decent wages, pensions, and entitlements. That system is the only proper, rational way to provide preschool and childcare facilities. And at the moment, people are paying second mortgages on childcare. I know, I raised my kids, 4 kids, during the worst economic crisis in this country. I know the burden that people face. I've experienced it. I didn't have access to childcare. We didn't have access to childcare at the time. So what we would say, we need that universal access to childcare, free at the point of use, again, paid for by progressive taxation. Okay,
Joe, you're knocking on doors. You're a full-time school teacher. You are still teaching, and so you're canvassing presumably at weekends and at night. Any political party that ever sets up on the basis that they should, they want to get into government. Yeah. The likelihood of people before profit getting into government would best appear to be with a coalition of sorts with Sinn Féin. And judging by the body language between Richard Boyd Barrett and Mary Lou MacDonald, to me, that sounds like something that could be very much on the cards, obviously depending on how many seats you get.
It's something that we have been actively promoting for the last year in the run-up to this election. We have been calling for a left government that rules out coalition with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, we will have red line issues that we can agree on, like taxation of wealth, like universal health and so on.
But would there be elements of the Sinn Féin policies that you'd have difficulty with?
Well, for example, we would be concerned about Sinn Féin's policy, for example, on vulture funds, for example. They haven't called for banning of vulture funds. They have made sounds like, the wealth, the corporations will be, untouched by a Sinn Féin government. They have sidled up to Fianna Fáil quite a bit. The leadership now, the members very often are quite angry about this kind of stuff. And so there's issues there about the Special Criminal Court, which is a non-jury court that they've always voted against, and now all of a sudden they're not voting against, they're just abstaining on.
So there would be issues.
There are issues. Yeah. We would have to sit down with Sinn Féin. As long as they rule out coalition with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, we can work on red line issues. If they agree to these red line issues, we will consider left government with them.
And a lot of people are suggesting this could be the election of independents.
Well, I would question, how independent are these independents? At the moment, the only entity in terms of political party or independent that has ruled out coalition with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael is People Before Profit. So how independent are they? Chris Maxwell is a former Fianna Fáiler. Patsy O'Brien is a former Fine Gaeler. Mark Duffy stood in the local elections as an independent, and now he's in Fine Gael. We have seen countless occasions where independents prop up Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and we're saying, if you really want an independent voice in the Dáil, vote People Before Profit. We need a socialist fighter for workers in the Dáil.
What's your chances of getting a seat?
Our chances aren't as great as we would like, but the main thing here is that we have presented our policies. We have put it up to the establishment. We have shown that there is an alternative way to run society. We've presented an alternative vision. We have used the election to stand in solidarity with Palestine, to oppose the genocide in Palestine, and to expose the government's complicity in that defence of Israel. We have done everything that we can to expose the lack of taxation of wealth, the need to provide public services. And I think that we've done a pretty good job in doing that.
And one question that I omitted to ask, because I've asked all the other candidates, do you believe that in Mayo that we have taken our fair share and that we've taken enough migrants and refugees?
I think that's completely the wrong question to be asking. I think the
question the electorate seem to want.
Okay, well, the question I would ask, the way I would respond to that is saying that these crises have nothing to do with immigrants and refugees. The crises that we have are caused by the policies of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that are benefiting a small tiny minority of the population of Mayo and of Ireland. We have thousands of empty homes that could have been easily retrofitted over the last 10 years. If we give refugees and asylum seekers the right to work and the right to live where they want, they will do what Irish people have done all over the world, which is benefit society.
Okay. Joe, thank you so much for coming in. Joe Daly there of People Before Profit, and he will be on your ballot paper on Friday. After the break, Claremorris Recreational Centre Development Team want you out tonight in the MacWilliam. I'll tell you why in a moment.